So our first speaker of the last session, our first day, is Tammy Brown-Brando from USDA Mark. And as mentioned earlier, she's going to be talking about using Rfid and depth images to record animal dimension and behavior. Please help me welcoming Tammy.
Good afternoon, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you. I'm an agricultural engineer by training, and I work in animal physiology and agricultural engineer. So what would an agricultural engineer want to do with genetics? And so I want to give you a little bit of background. As engineers, we look at the challenges that are facing our producers today, whether that's thermal environment, or the pressure that producers are being put on to reduce antibiotic use, increase animal well-being, decrease odor, and increase our waste management. And also another unique one that we don't always really think about, but where are tomorrow's animal caretakers going to come from? How are we going to encourage young people today to go into the field of taking care of our animals? And that's a really big challenge because a lot of those young people don't want to go and feed pigs on the weekend and go and milk cows on the weekend or get up at 5 a.m. and make sure everything is A-okay with the animals. So as engineers, we look at those challenges and go, how are we going to solve those challenges for producers as we go into the future? So as we look at different engineering disciplines, can we learn from those and can we apply those to animals? So precision ag is really being applied to crops. It's farm management. It's a farm management concept that uses observed and measured data between fields and within a field to make management decisions on applying different seeds or fertilizer or irrigation. Can we use those concepts in animal environments and to increase our production of animals, increase well-being, and decrease our antibiotic use? That field of study is called precision livestock farming or precision animal management. It is happening today. There are a few products out there that are available, mostly on the dairy side. However, as we go forward in time, those technologies are improving and increasing in complexity and allowing us to go into more species, into pigs and into poultry. Poultry is a little tougher because the birds are so small. But we're working on that. Precision livestock farming is using sensors or applying sensors to the environment, collecting data, modeling that data, to make decisions or highlight decisions that producers need to make, not replacing the farmer, but then highlighting which animals need to be cared for today. And so as we move forward, can we use that data or can we use that knowledge that we're gaining through PLF sort of applications and research into different areas? And I would say we can use that. So as we look at PLF, precision livestock farming techniques, we are looking to potentially, and researchers aren't developing new products, what we are is we're sort of highlighting things that commercial people can pick up and develop new products. That can improve animal management, but through that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, data collection on individual animals, we can use that data to better understand the facilities we're putting our animals in today. Is there a different pen design? As we understand what happens, the social interactions in the pens, we can then improve the pens to increase our animal well-being. Also, in collecting all of that data, we can then start understanding we can gather some really unique phenotypic data, some behavioral phenotypes, and then we can understand really the wide range of genetic differences, the animal-to-animal variability that happens within our pens, and then sort of capture that, understand that, find out if it's heritable. If it is heritable, we can use that for better genetic selection as we move into the future. So today I'm going to talk to you, and these are really broad strokes, on how we use image processing and how we use RFID technology, why we use one, why we use another, and to give you some ideas, more of a thought-provoking commentary than actual research, how we're going to do it in the field. So let's start with image processing. We use digital or depth images to detect behaviors in animals. We can use it to determine space utilization. We can use it to get direct animal measurements. As Jennifer Woodward-Green just said, in goats, we can use that in other species as well. So when we start looking at determining, so say we want to determine an area that an animal is going to utilize, so that we have a lot of different things we have to do to that image to make it repeatable and to make it automated. The last thing we want to do is collect images on a second by second or 5 second by 5 second basis and then have to go through and analyze all of those by hand. So a digital image is just a big array of numbers, and it's an array of numbers. A color image is three arrays deep, and we can use that, we can use mathematical formulas to select certain areas that we want to select. So we can easily select areas outside of the range that we don't want to sort of start to select the animal. Then we can use some edge detecting techniques to detect just the object of interest. Your eye is very, very good at selecting what is the area of interest. Computer programs aren't that good. When we look at this image in particular, we see there's a light line that goes across here. That line in itself would be a problem for our data analysis program. So that's one of the disadvantages of using digital images. The other disadvantage, or the other challenge you have to overcome, is this camera really close to the animal or is it far away from the animal? So you have to develop sort of an index so you know how many pixels per square centimeter that image represents. And that doesn't seem that hard, except if you're looking at pigs in an environment or birds in an environment. As the birds grow or if the camera moves, that index then changes. So you have to be very careful about that. To get away from lighting issues, we can go to a depth sensor. And a depth sensor is like a Kinect. There's several different depth sensors on the market. Kinect is one of those. What that does is it gives you an image, and instead of a value of intensity of color at each single pixel, it gives you a distance from the camera to every single pixel in the whole image. And as you can see from this video that's been playing, you can tell the pig, you can tell pigs in the area, and how that works is it functions in two different ways. You either have an IR image that gives you a distance or a time of flight that gives you a distance. Both give you a similar output. So just like a digital image, a depth image, you have a similar issue. You have to get rid of all of the extra stuff in the graph. And it really becomes tricky as you saw, when the pig is touching a wall or touching another pig, you have to be able to eliminate all of those extra things. This is a cleaned up image that we were looking at just the volume of the pig. And what we were trying to do is collect volume of pig and then use that to estimate weight. So is there an easier way to weigh pigs? So that was the question that we set out to answer. So in this image, and this isn't a commercial product, like I said, this is to sort of inspire a commercial product, but we have our Connect camera right above our scale, and we ran pigs on the scale, and we got a digital image and we got a depth image. We cleaned up those depth images and we took off the heads and the tails so we could get a projected volume of the pig to see if we could estimate weight. And what we would do with that long term is put that out in the pen, like maybe above a waterer, so we could gather individual animal weights without ever taking them to the scale. And here's our nice line here. Our R squared is 0.9918, which I was really happy with. We have about a 5% error. I think we can improve that, but the other error that's associated with that is we have the error in volume, but we also have an error in weight, and we don't really have a good grasp on how much error is associated with the weight on the scale. We just assume, or we know that there's an error associated with it, but as the pig walks, or the animal walks on the scale and walks back and forth and jumps around, your average weight on that scale is going to change a little bit. Is it 5%? Is it 3%? Is it 2%? I don't know that answer. That's the next project. So what else can we do with image analysis? So one of the big questions we had, projects that we're working on and questions we had, is pre-weaning mortality in sow crates is about 15%. And half of that is due to crushing. So we were looking at evaluating the crates themselves. So if we increase the size of the crate, do we give that extra space to the sow? Do we give it to the piglets? Do we divide it up? That's the question we had. And there hasn't been any evaluation of that done to date. But before we do that study, we had to come up with ways that we could collect posture data on sows. And one way that we decided to do that is we put a Connect camera over every single sow crate. And then as she stood up or sat down or lied down, we would collect this data at 5% or 5-second interval. So how well did we do at predicting posture changes in sows? So this was a subset of data. When the sow is lying and she's down on her sternum or on her side, we can predict that with 99% accuracy, 99.9% accuracy. When she's standing in the crate, we were at 99.2% accuracy. Setting, we were a little lower. And kneeling is when she goes to lay down and she brings her front down first, and then she kind of rolls onto her side. That kneeling, we didn't have a lot of images to test. We had 37 images in our test set, and we were only at 78%. I will tell you, we got every one of these 37 times that the sow was actually kneeling. Our trouble is when we have a little piglet that walks across the back end of the sow, it makes it look to the computer that the sow is kneeling. So we got a few extra ones of those, but we're working on increasing our accuracy on that. What else can we do with that? If she's lying down and we can detect that, can we detect if her udder is facing the heat lamp or not facing the heat lamp? So we asked that question, and yes, we can with about 98% accuracy. So what about feeding or drinking based on their behavior? And yes, we could do that as well. Shifting is just when she's changing positions, so we weren't as accurate there, but we weren't sure how to call those images. But we did make progress. So right now we have 60 Connect cameras and 60 computers collecting 5-second data on all the sows that are farrowing at mark. So the advantages of using images for PLF or for phenotypic data collection is you don't have any sensors or any instruments that are on the animal itself. You have very little equipment within the animal space. you can put your cameras outside of the animal space. The difficulty, and you can see we eliminated this difficulty, is it's difficult to identify individual animals within an image. And so we had only one single animal within our images. That's how we were able to do that. When you go out in the pen and you are trying to lace together different cameras from different views, or different cameras to cover an entire pen, and you can track animals around, you can do that, but it's difficult to determine which individual is which individual, especially when you're talking about pigs and poultry, because they all are similar colors and similar sizes. So now we'll move into RFID technology. RFID is radio frequency identification. Radio frequency identification is used to identify and track many different things. Animals are just one of those things that it can be used to track. We can learn a lot if we look across the different industries that are using RFID technology and learn how they're applying those and see if we can apply those in the animal realm. So, how does it work? An RFID tag has a little coil of wire in there, and then when it becomes, I guess, passive tags, when it comes into the range of an antenna, the antenna charges the little capacitor and by collecting energy within that little ring of copper wire. Then it goes into a listen mode, and the tag then echoes back its number. That's how a passive tag works. Each tag has an individual code on it, so no two tags should have the same code. So when you look at RFID, there's a lot of different RFID technologies out there. There's two main categories. There's passive tags and there's active tags. I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of them. Overview, passive tags have no battery. They only give off their number when they are within the range of an antenna. If they're far away, they will not give you any information. It only is when they're within the range of the antenna. They're lightweight, they're fairly low cost, and they have an unlimited life. And I put that in quotes because obviously you have some failure rates and you can lose tags. But generally they have an unlimited life. The other side is active tags. Active tags are a tag that sits out there and it's constantly giving off its number. And those numbers are intercepted by beacons, and it does require a battery. They're heavier because it has a battery within it. They have a limited life, and it's only because of the battery life. You can replace the battery and reuse the tag. The cost is about 20 times what a passive tag is right now. So the advantage of using an active tag is you can do tracking, just sort of like GPS tracking, only within a building. And you can have long distance reads. So let's start with why we would want to use passive RFID. Typically, the livestock tags that you see on the industry today are low frequency RFID tags. There's other frequencies out there. So you can use RFID technology to record behavior. So a lot of producers use them just to tag animals, and so you know that this animal, as it comes onto the scale, it's automatically read. But if we want to put antennas out in the environment, we can then start looking at behaviors. What we have to do is we have to make sure that we understand the innate properties and the frequency of the reader that we're going to use. What is our read distance? How does metal impact it? Does water impact it? We have to understand all of those things. When we properly place antennas in the environment, we can get really precise locations of animals. So our careful planning of antennas can give us drinking behavior, can get us feeding behavior, could give us, if an animal's playing with a toy in a certain area, it can give us all of that. Here's 3 different systems. The first system, all 3 of them do feed behavior monitoring. So when an animal comes to a feeder, it reads their tag, you know when they arrived, you know when they left, you know if they were there alone or with a group. RFID technology has been applied in this manner in three different universities, I guess 3 different academic settings. This one at US Mark, this one first in Hanover, Germany, and then in Belgium. And this is high frequency, this is ultra high frequency. It was applied in Germany as well. All 3 of them have been used to detect feeding behavior. All 3 of them started out as, there's a lot of different things you can do with it, but we're really looking at detecting illness in pigs using feeding behavior. So here's some raw data. Actually, it's somewhat processed data. It's how many minutes a day this individual animal spent at the feeder every day that they were within the facility. So day 1, and you can watch their feeding behavior change. And we can look at this large decrease as an anomaly. What is that anomaly? Is it that the feeder system was shut down? Is it that there was no feed at the feeder? Is it that that animal was sick or compromised in some other manner? So it's a red flag it could be the red flag for the producer that something is wrong. And you can look at the modeling of that to detect, is this an anomaly or is this an anomaly? And what's important and what isn't? That's part of our modeling effort. This was a disease outbreak. This animal was diagnosed with pneumonia at that time. Active RFID tags. What can we do with active RFID tags? So here is an active RFID tag. Here, it's about, 1 inch by 1 inch. It weighs about 30 grams. It can give you X, Y, and Z data for each tag on a 1 second by 1 second basis. As you see, the 4 beacons in the corner of the pen, and basically it determines the location of this tag by time of flight and the angle of interception from the signal to at least 2 of the beacons. So when we take a tag like this that's really designed for human application and try to put it on a pig, it becomes a little difficult. We have to think carefully how we're going to apply it to the pig, how we're going to protect the tag, and how we are going to not interfere with the animal in the environment itself. We chose to 3D print a tag enclosure and then just put them in the ear close to the head. It worked well for large pigs. It would not work well for small pigs. So what can we do with that? We can gather a lot of information, and we had 2 different objectives, but as we thought about it, this data is very rich. So how much movement, how much time does a pig spend moving in a day? How far do they travel in a day? So would you believe that the average pig walks 4 kilometers in a day, 24 hours? I thought that was hard to believe because I've seen a lot of pigs laying around. And they go from about 2.5 kilometers to 6 kilometers in a day. How would that change if we changed the size of the pen? Would that be beneficial to change the size of the pen? Would it be beneficial to make the pen smaller? Would they walk less? Would they gain more? If the pen was larger, would they walk more? Would meat quality be better? I don't know. I believe I took out that. But the average speed of a pig, we know the average speed of a pig when they're moving is about 0.5 kilometer a minute. So, determining locations. So we can do the same thing with active RFID that we do with passive RFID. We can know whether they're at the feeder, at the water, at a playing device, if they're in a dunging area. So what we do is we have X, Y, we set up these boundaries, and then we run our data through a algorithm. So when a pig enters, So let's see if my little animation works. When the pig enters an area, it tags it, and it tells us how long that pig was in that area, what time they entered, what time they left, and how long they were there. So this is some example feeding behavior, feeding and drinking behavior analysis from one study that we did. So each individual, how long did they spend at the feeder? How long did they spend at the waterer? Now, just like we have to be very, very careful when we put an antenna in the environment, that antenna is tuned correctly, that it only reads when the animal's head is in the feeder for a passive system, we want to tune those areas very, very precisely so we only get the data that we want to get. So if the pig is laying next to the feeder, we don't want that data in our data set. If the animal's laying next to the water, we only want if the animal's actually drinking. So you have to be very careful when you set up those ranges to actually get the data that you want. So how many times a day does a pig visit a waterer and pig visit a feeder? And how variable is that? And what is a good phenotype for how many times they visit a feeder? What's a bad phenotype? I don't know the answer to that. On the engineering side, I want to know if that changes. And if an animal eats 80 minutes a day and then suddenly drops to 40 minutes a day, I think that's significant. And we can go back and look at that. But phenotypically, is that a good pig that's eating 80 minutes a day, or one that's eating 60 minutes a day is better? So we have pigs here that are visiting the feeder over 400 times a day, and one right next to it visited the feeder about 60 times a day. So another thing, as an engineer, we can start, how does a pig spend its day? And maybe that isn't a great question, but how do they utilize the pen space? Can we look at how they're utilizing the pen space and design those pens better? So this is hot off the press as of last week. This is one pig over 24 hours. And how did that pig utilize the space? And you can see, over here's the feeder. Over here are some chains that are there for toys. And back here is sprinkle cooled. And you can see this pig didn't want to be sprinkled very much. So when we look at 4 pigs, and we had 19 in the pen that were instrumented, but when I put 19 pigs on there, you can't look at it, right? So are they utilizing certain spots? If we change where we locate the feeders, how does that change how they utilize the space? If we give them more space, does that change how they utilize their space? When we get into questions of tail biting, if we start having the questions that Europe's having, we can't tail dock. We need to know some of this information. How can we better set up the pens to better give them better access to things to do during their day? This helps answer those questions. So the pros of using RFID is I know exactly which animals and which animal is at this feeder, even if I have a lot of activity at that feeder, right? We're images, even if I knew which pig was which pig, when they're interacting like that at the feeder, it's going to be hard to follow that pig through that feeder event and away from that feeder event. The disadvantage of using RFID technology is we need equipment within the animal space, and we have to protect the equipment within the animal space, especially when we're talking about pigs, because they tend to pull stuff apart and chew on stuff. You need a tag on each individual animal. I see somebody laughing. You've dealt with pigs, I know. The cost of the tags to go on each individual animal. RFID tags run between $2 and $3 a piece if they're passive. The active tags are about $40 a piece. We have a problem keeping the active tags on, and they need to be better protected because we lost a few from pigs chewing on them. Losing tags is somewhat problematic because so we don't lose very many tags, like 1 or 2%, and then we'll get into a pen where you have somebody that's pulling out all your tags. So I think 75 or 80% of our tag loss was in 2 pens over 6 years. So that's how that goes. So research in precision livestock farming or precision animal management can really be used in 3 different areas. We really need to understand the animal's utilization of the space better, and that helps us better manage animals. That's from the engineering perspective. From the genetic perspective, we can gather a lot of unique phenotypes. We just have to be able to ask the right question of the data, be able to pull that data out, and make sure that the questions we're asking, if we set it up correctly, that we're getting the right data out. So with careful planning, we can do that. And with that, I will take any questions you have.
Questions for Tammy?
Guilherme Rosa from the University of Wisconsin. Thanks, Tammy, for the nice talk. 2 technical questions. So with the image, so you are trying to predict the weight, for example, and you have the animal in the scale, and you take, you are recording a video, or maybe taking many pictures.
We're taking image every second, so yeah.
And of course, the animal may be bending the body or pressing the body against the wall. So how you choose a good picture? Is it manually or?
With that, well, we did several things. First of all, we did sort out the bad pictures, like when the pig was walking onto the scale, those pictures, if there isn't a whole picture there. If the pig is leaning against the wall, it's just image analysis to take it out. If the pig is bent like this, there's a protocol we use to stretch that pig back out. So it's a horizontal and not bean shaped, right? Mm-hmm. So there are some different things we can do to make that image nice, even though it might not be as perfect in reality.
Okay. And another little technical question again. So so I was also impressed with the 4 kilometers that pigs walk per day. So if they have the sensor in the ears, and they of course shake the heads and ears, so you need to fit a smooth curve, right, to take this, because otherwise it's not the animal movement, but it's the head movement.
Exactly. So I think we filtered this data, and they had to move at least a half a meter, and anything less than a half a meter, we decided that it was just them either moving their head around or shifting or something like that. But they, from 1 second to another second, they had to move a certain amount. So that is exactly what we are thinking as well. And what we are thinking is, if we get the pig either at the feeder, I think at the water would even be better, because then they would be more independent. They wouldn't, I shouldn't say they wouldn't, because they would, but you wouldn't get them touching as much another pig. And the cleaner the image, the easier it is to data process, and the better your data is at the end. But we have a new system that has RFID antenna right by the water, so when they come to eat, we would know who is there. The problem is, and we have a data set that we're working with right now, that we have weights, and we have RFIDs, and we have images, and we're trying to get those data sets to merge so we know who the image is of, and that's a little tricky. Not undoable, just tricky.
I was wondering too, my past life was in ruminant nutrition and doing research with dairy cattle. And, you know, we had gates that you could identify the animal going up. And I was wondering if, and maybe you already are using this, where the pigs, if they're coming up to water, for example, that it would be like a nipple water where water would have to be flowing, which would sort of give you an indication that the animal's drinking, not a guarantee. And the same with a feeder that may have some kind of gate or something where the animal would have to push in order to be, you know, confirmed that it was consuming. Is that something you're doing or thinking?
Yeah, that isn't what we are doing, but yes, you can do that. We have set up our antenna field so that their head actually has to be into the feeder. So if they are laying beside the feeder, it will not pick them up, but their head has to actually be within the feeder in order for it to read the RFID. The water, they have to have we have kind of a stanchion, I guess, and they have to walk in there to get a drink. And so we've done a lot of validation with video, and that's why there was one picture of painted pigs, and that was our validation, one of our validation sets where we went out and painted pigs, and then we watch video and validate that how well we did setting up the antenna fields. And so far the validation data is looking fantastic, but we aren't done yet, so.
Have you looked at meal length or drinking length as a measure of social hierarchy?
I haven't, because I have a really hard time determining social hierarchy. Not that I'm not interested. I'm very interested, and if you want to tell me how I can figure out social hierarchy in a pen of 40, I am right there with you. We'll write a paper. I'm very excited about that. Actually, we've talked about that a lot, but I have a hard time ranking animals within a pen, and it's because I'm an engineer and not a behaviorist. So, we should talk later.
Let's thank Tammy for a wonderful talk.